In this section of the course, we're going to create our first HTML page. Remember that HTML is a programming language that communicates instructions to your web browser. It instructs the web browser on exactly how the web page should be displayed to the viewer. HTML and CSS, which we'll explore later on, defines the way fonts, colors, graphics, and hyperlinks are displayed on your pages. Let's take a look at a quick example. If we visit a web page through our web browser, for demonstration purposes, I've loaded techcrunch.com on Google Chrome. You can do the same using any browser of your choice. As we can see, this page is composed of basic text, links, images, and font styling. Let's take a look at the HTML code that instructs Google Chrome on how to display all the elements of this page. To do that, right-click on any blank area of the page and select View Page Source. As you can see, this is the actual code that communicates the layout of the page. Although this looks like a fairly lengthy and complex block of code, HTML pages follow more or less the same structure in all pages. By the end of this section, you'll be able to interpret and understand what most of this code means and even program HTML pages on your own. In this lesson, we're going to go over the structure of a basic HTML document. This structure will be the foundational building block of any HTML web page. We'll start off with a very simple page and add several elements to it as we progress through this section. Before we begin, you'll need to open Notepad++ if you're on a Windows machine or Text Wrangler if you're on a Mac. Once you have the text editor open, we'll need to open the file corresponding to this lesson from the Downloads folder. So go to File, Open, and open the file. With the file open, let's go over each element and the instructions they convey to the web browser. First of all, the document begins with the doctype HTML tag. This tag tells the browser that the markup of the language in which the page is written is HTML. Keep in mind that there are different types of HTML standards when it comes to coding your web page. Some HTML standards are quite strict and instruct the browser to follow a very strict set of rules when parsing and interpreting the code. An example of this is XHTML. The XHTML standard will check to make sure all your open HTML tags have corresponding closing tags, and you'll understand what that means in just a moment. There are many other compliance measures that make up the XHTML markup. It's not necessary to explore all of these because for the purpose of this course, we'll be using the HTML5 standard. This standard is more flexible in its compliance requirements among browsers and is also the most widely used. Previous versions of HTML, such as HTML4, are even more flexible but lack some of the new features inherent with HTML5. We'll learn about some of these new features as we progress through the course. Immediately after the doctype declaration comes the Open HTML tag. The HTML tag is the building block for our page. Most other tags will be nested within the Open HTML tag and the Closing HTML tag. Keep in mind that an open tag must be closed to define the ending of the HTML page. Please note that when we work with other nested languages such as PHP, the PHP code can be inside or outside the HTML blocks. However, for now, all the tags we work with will be nested inside the HTML open tag and the close HTML tag. The next tag in our web page structure is the open head tag. Similar to the HTML tag, the head tag must also have a corresponding closing tag. Note that anything contained within the open head and closing head tag will not be displayed visually within the content area of your browser. For a better understanding of the content area, let's preview this HTML page in our web browser to see what it looks like. To do that, click on Run, and in my case, I'm going to launch it in Google Chrome. You can select your browser from this list here. Here we can see what this HTML page will look like in our web browser. The content area is defined as this region of the browser window. The head tag contains important instructions for your browser. First, it identifies the title of the page. For this reason, the open title and closing title tags must be contained within the head tags. The actual title of the page should be contained within the title tags. The title of the page is displayed here. You can see that the title of this page is My First Web Page, and that corresponds to the text in between the title tags. The next set of tags contained in our head tags is the meta tags. Meta tags communicate with both the web browser and search engines to provide valuable information about your page. Let's start with the first meta tag. This meta tag is primarily intended for search engines. It's known as the meta name description. The description is followed by the content. It's the snippet of information below the link of a search result. The meta description describes the contents of the page to the searcher. The goal of a meta description is to persuade the searcher to click through to your website. If a meta description is not provided, the search engine will automatically generate one based on the content of your page. The next meta tag indicates the character set of the page. In this tag, the character set used is UTF-8. The explanation as to why the UTF-8 character set is used, among other alternatives, is fairly technical. To keep things less confusing, we've included some links for further reading on character sets. Next, we have the viewport meta tag. This is an important tag to include. Keep in mind that most users will not only view your web page through a computer screen, but also through a wide range of mobile devices. The viewport defines the user's visible area of a web page. The viewport varies depending on the device and will be smaller on a mobile phone than on a computer screen. The viewport meta tag gives the browser instructions on how to control the page's dimensions and scaling. The width equals device dash width sets the width of the page to follow the screen width of the device, which will vary depending on the device. The initial scale equals 1.0 sets the initial zoom level when the page is first loaded by the browser. This illustration provides an example of a web page without the viewport meta tag and the same web page with the viewport meta tag on a mobile device. Now that we've gone through some of the commonly used meta tags, let's go on to the next tag in our head tag, which is the open and close style tag. The code that is included within the style tags are referred to as style rules, and they define what is known as the page's cascading style sheet, or CSS. The style sheet can be used to define the formatting of just about any element within your HTML document. They can be used to format anything from fonts, line spacing, font color, table borders, image opacity, and hyperlink effects. This course actually has an entire section devoted to CSS because of their importance and frequency of usage. For this reason, all you have to know right now is that the style sheet is located in the head tags. The style tag on this demonstration page has one rule: body color red. This means that all the text located in the body of this HTML document will be displayed in red. But we'll explore this in much more detail later on. The next block of code we see is a JavaScript function. Remember that JavaScript allows us to create interactive effects within web browsers. The head tag contains the JavaScript functions that will be called upon in the body of our HTML document. We've included a basic JavaScript function that will be used to convert a user's text input from lowercase to capital letters. We'll see the JavaScript function in action when we move on to the body section of this HTML document. Please note this course has an entire section devoted to JavaScript coding. So for now, we've only included a very basic example for demonstration purposes. The body tag contains the content which is visible within the content area of your web browser. It contains things like text, hyperlinks, images, tables, lists, and any other visible elements. In our example, we've included two items in our body tag. The first is just basic text. Since we've not defined the location or any other attributes of this text, it will be displayed at the top left corner of our web browser. We also haven't specified the font face, but if you recall, we did specify the default font color as red in our cascading style sheet. In a moment, we'll preview this document in our web browser, and you'll see exactly how it looks. After the basic text content, we have a form element, the text field. We won't be covering form elements just yet, but this example demonstrates how we call a JavaScript function named myFunction to convert the input text from lowercase to capitals. If you recall, the JavaScript function was located in our head tag. We're now calling that function in the body tag. Let's preview the file again so we can see how this all comes together in our web browser. We can see that the text that was contained in our body tags is displayed here as it should be. The color is red, and it's located at the top left corner of the content area by default. Next, we have our JavaScript function. To see how it works, type your name into the text field in lowercase letters and click anywhere on the screen to activate the script. You'll see the name in the text field converts from lowercase to uppercase format. And that's it. Once we've closed the body tag, all that remains is our closing HTML tag to complete the entire HTML document. This is the basic structure of an HTML page. In this lecture, we're going to discuss how to create a paragraph spacing between lines of text. First, let's take a look at the web page we've developed so far in our web browser. We can see that all the text content is on one line, and we want it separated onto multiple lines. The first paragraph spacing that we want to apply is after this line. Now, in order to do this, we need to add opening and closing p tags around the text that we want to separate onto a new line. So now we've added the opening and closing p tag. Before the changes can take effect, we have to save our document. And now let's go ahead and preview it again. So now we can see that the two lines of text are separated by a paragraph spacing. Next, we want to add another paragraph spacing here in front of the text input and the label "Enter your name." So we'll do the same thing again. Put an opening and closing p tag where we want the paragraph spacing. And then file save. And let's take a look at it again. And so there it is. Using the paragraph tag, we now have all three lines of text on separate lines. Now you might have noticed that when we added a paragraph, it created a fairly large space. we can see a fairly wide gap between the first, second, and third line. It actually double-spaced the lines of text. What if we only wanted a single line break? Well, for that, we'd have to use a break tag. To begin, type a block of text nested within a paragraph tag. We will then separate this block of text using a line break. Now we have the lines typed. We want to separate line 1 from line 2. So to do that, we'll go ahead and type a break tag, or enter a break tag. Now you'll notice that the break tag does not require a closing break tag. Now let's go ahead and save the file and preview it in our browser. So we can see that line 1 is separated from line 2, and the gap is much smaller using the line break tag versus the paragraph tag. Now let's talk about the spacing between characters. Say we wanted to add a third block of text. So we'll go ahead and enter it in. We want to place this line of text 5 spaces away from sentence 2 on the same line. Let's see what happens when we add 5 spaces in our HTML code with the spacebar and preview it in our browser. So I've entered 5 spaces. I'm going to save the file, and I'm going to preview it to see if the spaces show up in our web browser. And as we can see here, only 1 space was registered. HTML ignores spaces, and this process is called white space collapsing. Spaces created by the spacebar, the tab key, and return key are all ignored when you write your code. One way to add additional spaces is to add the following tag. Where you require your space. Your web browser interprets this tag as a single space. It's the equivalent of pressing the spacebar once on your keyboard. So let's go ahead and copy this tag and just paste it 4 more times. So we're trying to register 5 spaces. Now save your document and once again preview it. And now we can see that we have 5 spaces between line 2 and line 3. So that is how you enter single spaces in your HTML document. The header tag allows you to create emphasized text, such as titles or headings. Header tags come in different sizes depending on the level of emphasis you require. Let's insert a few headers in our document under our existing text items. To insert a header, we'll start with the open header tag. The 1 value represents the size of the header. The smaller the value, the larger the header. We'll insert a few more just to see some of the different sizes available. Now let's save our file and take a look at the changes in our web browser. So here we can see our 4 headers. Notice that header 1 within the H1 open and close tag is the largest. Header 2, header 3, and header 4, which is the smallest. In this lesson, we're going to be working with formatting text, making text bold, italic, underlined, and other formatting options. Let's start with creating a text element and making it bold. We'll start by creating a new paragraph under our last header. Now to make this text bold, we would add the following tags around the text we just typed. Strong, that's a strong open tag, and a corresponding strong close tag. Now let's save this file and take a look at it in our web browser. So this is what the bold text looks like. Now we want a second line of text directly under this bold text line. So using the tab key, you can indent just to keep the format of your code clean and organized. This next text element, we're gonna make it italic. To make it italic, you use the EM tag. And the EM tag does have a corresponding close tag. Now remember, if we want this italic text line directly under the bold text line, we need to add a line break. And we'll add another break here because right underneath this, we're going to add an underlined text, which is created with the U tag. We can also insert a strike through our text using the strike tag. It also has a corresponding closing strike tag. So let's take a look at what this looks like so far. So here we can see we have our bold text, italic text, underlined, and strike through text. That's what it looks like in the browser. Now let's go ahead and just add another break For this next line, we're going to combine a variety of different formatting options together. So let's type the text first. So we want to make this line of text bold, italic, and underlined. So we'll begin by adding all our tags. We can start with any, the order doesn't matter. So we'll start with italics, and we'll create the closing tag at the end. So as you can see, the tags must be closed in the same order they were opened. And I'll save that. And so there it is. We have a line of text that's bold, italic, and underlined. Another way of formatting text is known as inline text formatting. Note that this is an outdated way of formatting your text. In the next section, we'll be using CSS to format text and other HTML elements. CSS is a much more efficient way of formatting text and offers a much higher degree of format customization. For this exercise, we'll change the format of header 4 using inline text formatting. We'll apply a font phase, change the font size, and apply a different color. In order to do that, we're going to start with the open font tag. The font tag has different attributes. One of the attributes is the font face. We'll apply the Arial font to this text. The next attribute is the size. And we can plug in any numerical value here. And the font color is another attribute. We'll change the color to blue. Next, we'll just add the closing font tag. And this is known as inline text formatting. So let's go ahead and save the file and preview the file in our browser. And there it is. We can see the header is much larger. It's now blue. And the font face is different than the other headers. It's Arial. In this lecture, we'll be adding an unordered list to our document. An unordered list looks like this. We can see the heading, and then the list items in no particular order. So in our HTML document, let's go ahead and first insert the heading for our list. We'll use the h3 tags. Once we have the header created, we can start the list. To create an unordered list, we use the open and close UL tag, which stands for unordered list, as you probably guessed. Now inside the UL tags, we create the list items using the LI tag. There's the open and the close li tag. And we can just insert the first list item within these tags. We'll just insert a few other items to populate the list. And there it is. This is the complete list with the heading. Let's save the file and once again preview it in our web browser. That's what the list looks like in the browser. In addition to unordered lists, we also have ordered lists. The list items in an ordered list are identifiable by sequential numerical values. Let's take a look at an example. Here we have the heading My Favorite Vacations, and underneath we have each list item. Attached to each list item is a number. And so this is an ordered list. Let's go ahead and create the ordered list in our HTML document. To begin, we'll start by entering a header, just like we did for our last list, which was the unordered list. So we'll start off with H3. Now to create the ordered list, we start with the open and close OL tag, which stands for ordered list. And in between these tags, just create an indent by pressing the tab key and start creating your list items. And that's what the list looks like. Notice we don't have to specify the actual value attached to each list item. That will be created automatically, starting with from lowest to highest. So let's go ahead and save this file and preview what the list looks like in our web browser. So there it is. We have the header and each list item with the sequential numerical value attached next to it. So far, we've worked quite a bit with text data. Our next objective is to insert some images into our document. We've included 4 images in the downloads file pertaining to this lecture. You can use these images or your own set of images. Regardless of which images you use, you must place them in the same folder as your HTML file. This is because we'll be using relative file referencing. We'll explain relative versus absolute file referencing in the next lecture. First, let's start with a heading, and we can place our images under this heading. With our heading created, let's create a paragraph so we have some spacing between our heading and the images that we're going to insert. I'll start by inserting the first image. This is done with the image tag. The image tag has several attributes. For the purpose of this lecture, we use the source attribute, which defines the location of the image. We'll also use the width and height attribute, which defines the size of the image. With our first image created, or inserted, let's insert the second image. I'll also specify the width and height of this image. And the third image. The image tag, as you can see, does not require a closing image tag. For the fourth image, we're going to insert an image from the internet. So for the source, we'll be using the URL of the image. This is called an absolute file reference because it includes the full path of the image. And once again, our next lecture is going to talk more about absolute and relative file referencing. So this is an image found on a Wikipedia page. And I'll just specify the width and height as well. Okay, and so we've inserted 4 images. 3 images have a relative file reference. They're located within the same directory as our HTML file. We've specified the width and height of each image. And for the last image, the source is an external web page. So we've included a URL of or a link to the image, and also the width and height as well. So let's go ahead and save this file and preview what it looks like in our web browser. So as you can see, we now have 4 images inserted into our document. To embed video in an HTML5 document, we can use the video element. Inside the element, we can set various attributes. First, we can set the width and height using fixed dimensions or percentage. In this example, we have the width set to 600 pixels. So you can see that the video width stays at 600 pixels regardless of the browser window size. If we set it to 100%, the video will take up the full content area of the web browser. We can use the controls attribute to specify if we want the user to be able to see the control menu. This includes the play button, the progress bar, the volume and full screen controller. If you do not want the controls, simply remove the controls attribute. And after saving the file, you can see that the controller is no longer there. Remember to add an autoplay attribute if you remove the controls. Otherwise, the video will not play automatically and your user will have no way to play the video. So I'll save the file and refresh, and you can see that the video now starts automatically. The autoplay attribute does not work in mobile devices like iPads and iPhones, so that is something to keep in mind. The video element requires that we specify the source of the video. We've included a demo video you can use in the downloads folder corresponding to this lesson. Just make sure that you place the video in the same directory that you've saved this HTML file into. The video is titled ya.mp4. Next to the source, we've specified the video type. And underneath the source tag, it's a good idea to notify the user if their browser does not support the video tag. That way they'll know to update their browser. And lastly, close the video tag. And so as you can see, it's fairly easy to work with this element. In this lesson, we'll explore absolute versus relative file referencing. The concept is best illustrated with an example. In our last exercise, we inserted a video into our HTML page. We did so using the video element, which required a source attribute. We've worked with the source attribute when inserting images as well. The source attribute requires that we specify the source location and name of the file we want to insert into our document. Since the files we've inserted to this point are in the same folder as the HTML file, we've only had to specify a file name. For example, ya.mp4. This is an example of relative file referencing. The path of the file is defined relative to its directory. Now say, for example, we wanted to insert an image into this document from an external source. For example, another website altogether. For that, we need to use absolute file referencing. An absolute file path requires that we include the complete address of the file as shown in this block of code that I'm about to insert. Here we've included a JPEG file from an external website, planwallpaper.com. The full URL to the file is required for the image to be displayed because it's from an external source. So now if I refresh the page, we can see that the image is outputted in our web browser. Here's the URL to the image, and you can see that it's displayed in the browser when we access it. And so that's all there is to it when it comes to relative versus absolute file referencing. In this lecture, we're going to explore link creation within our HTML document. We'll be creating both text links as well as image links. Let's start with adding a link on the images we inserted in the last lecture. We'll link each vacation picture to a relevant website. To do so, we'll be using the A tags. Add the following code around your first image. We'll start with the opening A tag, followed by the href attribute. And this attribute specifies where this image will link to. And we have to include the complete URL. In this case, we're going to have it linked to miami.com. Be very careful not to make any typos in the URL, otherwise the link will not work. And that's it for the first link. You'll notice that the closing A tag and the opening A tag do encompass the image tag and the image attributes. So the link must encompass the entire image, from the opening tags to the closing. And let's just go ahead and apply a few other links as well to the other images. Now I'll just copy and paste this code to save time, and I'll change the link source. And now that I have all my links created and attached to the images, I'll go ahead and save my file and preview this in the web browser to make sure that all the links do work. So right away when I hover my mouse over these images, I can tell that a link is attached to the image because the cursor changes. Let's just go ahead and click on each one to make sure that the links do work. So it appears that each link does work, and that's how you apply links to images. Now let's go ahead and create textual links. Now the process of adding links to text is identical, but first we have to create a few lines of text to apply links to. So let's go ahead and create a new paragraph. And then just type some text. Now I'll just indent this text. And now we can begin adding the text links. We'll use the same links that we used last time because we know they work. You can just copy and paste from the other links we created. Okay, so now that we have our links applied, we can go ahead and just save the file. We'll test one of them just to make sure it works. I'm sure you get the idea. So we can see our list there. And we'll just click on florida.com. And it does go to the miami.com website. Now, one thing you'll notice is when I clicked on the link, it opened the link in the same browser window as our original page. A lot of times what you might need to do is open the link in a new browser window. So then that way the original window doesn't close. And the viewer can very easily revert back to it. And in order to do that, we need to add a target attribute to our A tag. So the target attribute looks like this. And to specify that we want this page to open in a new browser window, you put an underscore and type blank within the quotations. And that'll open in a new blank window. That's what that means. So just copy and paste that attribute into the other links. And then save your file and preview it in the browser. Okay, so now we can see that the link opens in a separate browser window. And it's a lot more convenient to switch back to our original page without having to press the back button. And it looks like each one is working and opening in a separate browser window. In the previous lecture, we explored adding links that take you to different web pages. Now we're going to work with anchor tags. Anchor tags allow us to link to a specific area of content on our existing page. Let's take a look at an example. On this page, you'll notice we have a table of contents at the top of the page that lists 5 articles. Article 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The idea is to have these items linked to their corresponding article on the same page. So if I click on Article 3, for example, you'll notice that the page navigates to the beginning of the 3rd article in our content area. And the same goes for Article 4, and so on and so forth. In order to make this work, we need to set up an anchor that will instruct a text link on the position of the article that corresponds to the link. We've included a file called anchors.html in the downloads folder corresponding to this lecture. You'll need to open this file in your text editor in order to follow along with this tutorial. So here we have the source code for the file. And in order to make this work, we'll have to go ahead and add a few anchors on all 5 article headings. To add the anchor, locate the article heading and insert the following code. You'll notice that we're using the A tag with an ID attribute. Later on in this tutorial, we're going to link to each one of these anchors from our table of contents. So once you've inserted your first named anchor, you'll need to insert the others in front of the other article headings. So just copy this block of code and paste it in front of each article heading. Remember to make sure you change the number of the article so it corresponds to the correct article heading. Now that we've inserted the named anchors, we'll need to link to them from our table of contents. So let's scroll up to the table of contents and add the following code around each article heading. You'll notice we're using the A tags with the href attribute. One difference is that we have a number sign in front of the link. The number sign instructs the browser not to divert the user to a new web page when the link is clicked. When the number sign is followed by an anchor name, the page will notice search for the anchor name on the existing page. It will then retrieve the content that is defined by the anchor position. So again, let's copy this block of code and create our links for the additional article headings. Once again, remember to change the number so it corresponds to the correct article heading. So once you've added all your links, save the file and preview the page in your web browser to make sure that everything works. So now we can see that Each item in the table of contents does have a link attached to it, and let's just confirm that it does work. So Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, 4, and 5. In this lecture, we're going to be creating tables using HTML. When it comes to building web pages, it's very important to have a solid understanding of table structures. Tables allow us to organize data and content in an organized way. Table data is structured in the form of rows and columns. The intersection of a row with a column forms a table cell. The individual cells contain the actual data. Data can be in the form of text, images, or even video content. This example illustrates the structure of a basic table used to record the findings of a survey that asked respondents to list their favorite sport. Here we have a table with 2 columns and 9 rows, which gives us 18 individual cells. Let's start off by creating this table in a standard HTML5 document. For this, you'll need to open your text editor, and we'll also need to set up the basic HTML page structure as we learned in earlier lessons. Once you have the basic HTML page structure created, go ahead and save your file anywhere on your computer. You can save the file as tables.html. Make sure to put the HTML extension at the end. So by now this should all look familiar, and as you probably guessed, the code block for our table will be inserted between the open and closed body tags. We'll begin by adding our open and close table tags. The table tag also has several attributes. First, we can specify the width of the table. For now, we'll put the width as 100%. We'll come back to the width attribute once we have our table created, because there are different ways the width can be stated. Next, we can set a border for our table. Let's set the border to 1 pixel. And you can increase this value for a thicker border, or you can put 0 for no border. We can also put a border color attribute. And we'll set that to blue. Next, we can specify the cell spacing and cell padding attributes. This illustration provides a visual illustration of what each of these mean. The cell padding will define the amount of space around the cell contents. The cell spacing, on the other hand, will determine the amount of space between each cell in your table. And the unit of measurement for cell spacing and cell padding is also a pixel. Once we've defined these attributes, we can start adding rows and columns. Each row is defined by an open and close TR tag for table row. So I'll create one row to begin with. And inside each row, I can create any number of columns. So our table had 2 columns, and a column is represented by the open and close TD tag. You can insert your content inside the open and close TD tag. So the first part of our table was the headings. So that's what the first row would look like. Now I'll insert the second row. And again, each row had 2 columns. Just enter some data inside these columns. Made a mistake there. So remember, the first column was the sport, and we'll put the sport label in each of the first columns, and then the response in each of the second columns. I'm just copying and pasting. I'm just changing the sport labels, and also the data. And there it is. That's all the rows and columns for this particular table. So with the table created, let's save this file and preview it in our web browser to see the final result. And that's what the table looks like. One thing you may have noticed is the table is the full width of the browser's content area. And this is because we specified a table width of 100%. You'll notice that if we change the size of the browser window, that the table expands and contracts and always maintains 100% of the browser window. Now let's see what would happen if I change the width to 50%. So I'll go back to the source code and just change the width to 50%. And then refresh the page. Now we can see that the table always maintains 50% of the browser's content area. Okay, so with the percentage-based width, the table will always expand and contract to maintain that percentage, the specified percentage of the browser's content area. But what if we wanted the table to be a fixed width so it doesn't expand or contract with the browser window? For that, we would need to change the width from a percentage to a fixed value. So let's go ahead and change from 50% to 500. Now, if you don't specify a percentage, that converts the table width into a pixel-based table width. So 500 pixels will be the new width of this table. So we're going to save the file, and I'm just going to reload the web browser. And now you'll notice that no matter how big or small the browser window is, the table always stays at 500 pixels. In the last lecture, we explored how to create a basic table. Now we'll see how the table width behaves when one table is nested into another table cell. If a table is placed within another table, it's referred to as a nested table. The table containing the nested table is referred to as the parent table. Let's start by creating another table in our existing document that has one row and one column. We'll start with the open table tag, and we'll set the width to 100% to begin with. We'll apply a 1 pixel border, and we'll set the border color to red so we can distinguish our parent table from the nested table. We'll close our open table tag. And now we'll create the single row and the single column. So now that we have that table created, we want to nest our original table into our newly created parent table. So we have to do this very carefully. We need to copy this entire block of code from the close table tag right up to the open table tag on our original table. We're going to right click and cut this block of code and paste it inside within the TD tags on our new table. So right click and paste. And I'm just going to do a little bit of formatting so it helps us stay organized. Just highlight all the table rows and columns. You can, if you position your cursor here and hold the Shift key and click at the end of the area you want to highlight, it highlights the entire block of code, and then you can just indent by using the Tab key. Okay, so that just helps us stay a little bit more organized. Before we go any further, let's save our file and preview this in our browser to make sure that everything is working correctly. And so now we can see the parent table identified by the red border and the nested table with the blue border. So currently, our parent table is 100% and our nested table is 500 pixels. So for that reason, the parent table is taking up the full width of the content area of our browser. And the nested table is a fixed value at 500 pixels. Now let's try a couple of different scenarios to see what happens when we adjust the width of the nested table relevant to the parent. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is we'll change the width of the nested table to 50% rather than 500 pixels. Now save your changes and refresh the browser window. Now we can see as we expand and contract the browser window, our nested table is always occupying 50% of the parent table. Okay, I'll change the width of the parent table to 80%. And press refresh. And now the parent table is 80% of the content area of the browser window. And the nested table is 50% of the parent table. So it's a little bit confusing, but with a bit of practice, you'll get the hang of it. You'll notice that as we expand and contract the browser window, the nested table always stays at 50% of the parent table's width. Okay, this time we'll make the parent table 600 pixels and the nested table 100%. So this time the parent table is a fixed 600 pixels and the nested table is 100% of the 600 pixels. So as you can see, the width settings of the nested and parent table will affect the way the table is displayed in your browser. Oftentimes, when working with tables, it's necessary to combine two columns into one. For example, on this table, the first row contains a heading, My Expenses. Since we don't need two columns in this row, let's go ahead and merge them. To do so, remove the second column in the first row. So here's our first row, the open and close TR tag. Inside we have two columns. I'm going to remove the second column, and next we need to add the col span attribute to the first column and set the value to 2. The col span attribute defines the number of columns a cell should span. So I'll save the file and refresh. And as you can see, we've now merged the two columns in the first row. In certain cases, we may want to prevent text from wrapping onto multiple lines if there's not enough space in a cell to accommodate it in one line. To do this, we can attach a no wrap attribute to the table column. To illustrate how this works, I'll need to enter a block of text into any one of our rows. I'll insert it into the first column. Now with the text inserted and the file saved, I'm going to refresh the page you can see that the text is automatically forced onto the next line at the end of the row. Now, if we add the no wrap attribute, so this is the column that contains the text, and I'm going to add a no wrap attribute. When I save the page and refresh, you can see that the text now appears on a single line. And there's going to be a bit of scrolling because it's a fairly long block of text. The table is automatically expanded to accommodate the entire block of text. We can use the background attribute to apply a background image to a table. For the purpose of this example, this is the image that we'll be using as the background. The image is called tablebg.jpg, and it can be found in your downloads folder. Make sure you place the image in the same folder as your HTML file so we can use a relative file path. Now apply the background attribute to the table element and set it equal to the image. Now save the file and refresh. You can see that this image has now been applied as the background to the table. We can also apply the background attribute to just the table rows, and similarly to just the table columns as well. We can align the contents of a table cell using the TD align attribute. For example, we'll place the attribute in the columns holding the values 100 to right align the text. So we can see that the values now shift to the right side of the column. The TD align attribute can also be set to left, center, and justify. In this section of the course, we're going to be creating an input form using HTML. A form is used to gather input from your user. Forms are the most common method of data collection from website visitors. The data that is inputted into the form can be stored into a database or submitted to an email address. Keep in mind that in order for a form to work and transmit data, we need to use a programming language that communicates with our web server. Later in this course, we'll be exploring PHP and working more with data processing. For now, in the HTML section of this course, we'll only be creating the front end of the form. This is what the user sees through their web browser. Let's take a look at an example of a basic contact form on the web. On this form, the user is able to submit an inquiry directly to the website's support staff by completing the required fields, for example, name, email, subject, and message. If we try to submit the form without filling in any information, we can see a number of errors appear. This is known as form validation. Now let's explore how a form is processed once the user clicks the send button. First, the user completes the form and fills out all the form fields. Next, the data is transmitted to a PHP script which validates the form. Validation includes checking to make sure the data is accurate to a certain degree. Data validation is very important and can be done in client-side programming languages such as JavaScript, and also in server-side languages such as PHP. It's recommended that both are implemented. Keep in mind that users can disable client-side validation by adjusting settings in their web browser. Server-side validation, on the other hand, cannot be avoided. We'll be working with both types of validation techniques later in this course. Examples of data validation types include checking email address formats, checking the length of data typed into a field. For example, a minimum amount of characters or a maximum amount of characters must be met in order for form submission. Or perhaps checking the format of a phone number. This is not an exhaustive list, and there are many different ways data can be validated. Once the data is validated, the data is processed. The data can be inputted into a database, it can be transmitted to an email address, or some other form of data processing. On the other hand, if validation fails, the user is typically sent back to the contact form page so corrections can be made. As a reminder, we'll be working with form data processing later in this course. For now, we'll begin with developing just the front end of the form using HTML. In this lecture, we'll be creating an HTML form. This is a sample of the form we'll be creating. It's an employment application form. It asks the user for some personal information. The form consists of text fields, select menus, checkboxes, radio buttons, text areas, and a submit and reset button. The form inputs and input labels are organized into a table. So let's get started. You'll need to open the form.html file in the Downloads folder corresponding to this lecture. With the form.html file open, you'll notice that the basic page structure is already set up. The HTML code also contains a table with 2 columns and 9 rows in the body. We'll use this table for our form fields. Let's preview the file just to make sure our table is visible and there are no errors in the code. This is what your page should look like initially. Just an empty table with our 2 columns and 9 rows. The first thing we need to do to create our form is insert our open and close form tags. These tags will contain all the HTML code pertaining to our form fields, such as text inputs, select menus, submission buttons, and other form elements. It's very important to create the form tags first, otherwise the form will not work. The form tags must encompass the entire table because all our form fields will be contained within the table. The form tag also has important attributes that we must define. First, it's a good practice to name the form, so that if you create multiple forms on the same page, each can be distinguished from one another. We'll name this form Employment. Next, we need to instruct our browser on where to send this form data upon submission. This is known as the form action. In our case, we'll be sending the data to a PHP script, which will instruct our web server on how the data should be processed. For the form action, let's type in send.php. We will create send.php in the PHP section of this course. In addition to the action attribute, we must also specify a method of data transmission. A form method tells the browser to submit the data through the post or get command. For now, we'll define the method as post. We'll explore both these methods in more detail in the next lecture. In this lesson, we'll conduct a quick overview of the difference between the post and get method of transmitting form data. This topic will be explained in much more detail in the PHP section of the course. As we mentioned earlier in the course, the HTTP protocol facilitates communication between our web browser and server. There are two types of methods that can be used to transmit data between a client and a server. This includes the get and post method. The get method requests data from a specified resource. The post method submits data to be processed to a specified resource. When using the get method, the name and value pairs from the form fields are sent in the URL string, as shown in this example. Here, we can see the values contained in the fname and lname field are attached to the end of the file name of our form action, send.php. The post method, on the other hand, sends the name and value pairs in the HTTP message body, as shown in this example. Both the post and get method have unique properties that are specific to each one. We'll start with the get method. Get requests can be cached, they remain in the browser history, they should only be used to retrieve data, they have length restrictions, they should never be used when transmitting sensitive data such as passwords, and they can be bookmarked. The post method, on the other hand, has no restrictions on data length, cannot be bookmarked, does not remain in browser history, and the requests are never cached. With our form created, we can now start inserting our input fields. Let's start by entering our form heading, followed by our form labels for the two input fields. In the first row and first column, we'll enter employment application. In the second row and first column, we'll enter the label for the first input field, first name. And in the third row of the first column, last name. With the labels entered, we can now start putting in our fields. The first name field will require a basic text input field. The HTML code for an input field is as follows. It does require a closing tag. The input field also allows different attributes. First, we need to assign a name. This will be important later in the course when we make this script functional and transmit the data to our PHP script. Your name should correspond to the field label. So we'll just abbreviate first name and we'll call it fname. Try to avoid capital letters, special characters in the name, because that will cause complications later on when we attach this form to our PHP script and retrieve the data from these form fields. So just keep the names lowercase and as simple as possible. Next, we can assign a max length attribute to make sure the user cannot type in more than a certain amount of characters. So for example, say most first names wouldn't exceed 50 characters. So that's how we would prevent more than 50 characters from being typed into the input field. And that's it for the first text input. Now let's copy this block of code and paste it into this column for the last name. So we'll change the name to lname. And that's it. Let's go ahead and save the file and make sure that our first two form fields are visible. So that's what that should look like up to this point. We have the form labels, first name and last name. We have the title of the form, employment application. And we have our first two text input fields. For the position, we'll need to allow the user to select from a menu of different options. As you can see here, the drop-down menu has 4 options that the user can select from: accountant, receptionist, administrator, and supervisor. Let's start with entering our input label. So this is in the third row, first column, and in the third row, second column, we can create our select field. And to do that, we'll be using the select tags. I'll just do a bit of formatting. We need to give our select tags a name, just like we did for the input fields. This attribute is important. We'll call it position. Now we can create our select menu options. Each option should be contained within an option tag. So let's go ahead and create 4 options, just the tags for now. And I'll just copy and paste that 3 more times. Now with our option tags created, let's enter the option that the user will see in the drop-down menu. The option tag also requires a value attribute. This attribute identifies the value that will be attached to each option. Let's say, for example, that the user's inputs will be stored into a database that only allows 2 characters to identify which option the user selected. In this case, the user will see the option headings in full: accountant, receptionist, administrator, and supervisor, but the values that get passed onto the PHP script will only be the first 2 letters of each option. So to set the value attribute, we just type in value equals, and because the database can only store 2 characters, we'll use the first 2 characters of each option. And that completes the first select menu. We'll create the second one in the same way. So here's our next table row. We'll insert the field label. which is experience level. And we'll copy this select menu and paste it into this column. We'll call this experience, and we'll just change the options. And it looks like we don't need the fourth option, so I'll just go ahead and delete that. And we'll also change the values that get submitted to our PHP script. So entry level, and very experienced. Let's go ahead and save our file and preview it in our web browser. So that's what we have so far. There's the first select menu we created, and here's the second. Next, we need to allow the user to indicate the job type they are searching for. Whether it's full-time, part-time, contract, or a combination of each. To do this, we'll be using checkboxes. To create a checkbox, let's go ahead and type the following code. Again, we'll start by entering our label. The checkbox is an input, but for type, we have to specify checkbox. We need to give this input a name, just like all the other inputs we've worked with. And we'll call it FT, short for full-time. Now we'll close the input tag. And we'll just put full-time text next to the checkbox, so the user knows which option they're selecting. And that's all there is to it. We just need 2 more of these, because we have 3 checkboxes, so I'll just copy that entire block of code. I'll rename this to PT, change the label to part-time, and one more. This is CT for contract. So that's it for job type. Next, we'll do employment status. And employment status, the inputs are different than job type in that they're radio buttons. The key difference between checkboxes and radio buttons is that checkboxes allow you to check off multiple options. With the radio button, we only want the user to be able to select one option. So let's go ahead and enter our label, which is employment status. And then inside of our column, we'll create an input. This time the type will specify radio. The name, we'll call it e-status, short for employment status. And the value, this is the value that will be submitted to our PHP script. Then we'll close the input and we'll just put the text employed next to our radio button. So once again, the user does know which option they're selecting. So copy this block of code, and we need to create two other options. Unemployed and student. You'll notice for checkboxes, we gave each checkbox a unique name. For radio buttons, we give all three radio buttons the same name, and this is known as a radio group, a radio button group. It makes sure that the user can only select one radio button out of that group. So now that we have our checkboxes and radio buttons created, we can save the file and preview it in our web browser. So that's what your form should look like up until this point. The last input field we want to create is the text area. The text area is similar to the input field, but it allows much more text to be inputted and across multiple lines. So let's take a look at an example. You'll notice if I copy and paste this over and over again, the text area allows for scroll bars, and we can also expand it and contract it. This makes it much more convenient for the user when it comes to inputting large amounts of text. So before we create the text field, we'll start with our label, which is additional comments. And in the column next to it, we'll input the text area. So to do that, we'll create the text area tag. And we'll explain what the attributes mean in just a moment. The open text area tag does require a closing text area tag. So as you can see, it includes the name attribute, just like all the other fields we created. It also allows you to specify the width of the text area, which is represented by cols, and the height specified by the number of rows. In this case, our text area will be 5 rows in height. Beyond 5 rows of text, the scroll bars will be enabled automatically. So let's save our file and take a look. So this is our text area here. And you can see that the scroll bars do activate. Now the last part of this form that we want to create is the submit and reset button. The submit button will submit the form data to our send.php script or whichever file you've specified in the action attribute of your form. The reset button will empty the data inputted into the fields. And so that's how that works. So let's go ahead and create those two buttons. And we want to insert this in the second column on the 9th row, our last row. So the button is an input. We have to specify that the type, which is a submit button. We'll give it a name. We'll just call it submit. And a value. And then we just close the input. And we'll do the same for the reset button. I just capitalize the first letter. So let's go ahead and save the file and take a look at the entire form. Okay, so that's the entire form. You'll see we have the two text inputs. Our select menus are working. Our checkboxes. And the radio buttons, text area. And let's just test our reset button. So that works. Now the submit button will not work because we have not created the send.php file. Okay, that's the file that all this data will be transmitted to. And then that PHP file instructs our web server on what to do with the data. Is it going to be sent to a database, to an email address, or some other form of processing? We'll learn how to do that in the PHP part of this course. In this lecture, we're going to explore working with iframes. An iframe is an HTML document embedded inside another HTML document. Iframes are commonly used to insert content from another source into a web page. For the purpose of this lesson, we want to build a page that allows users to conduct searches on multiple search engines from a single page, as shown in this example. Here, we can search both ask.com and bing.com search engines, and the search results will load in their corresponding iframe. To begin, you'll need to open your text editor and create a basic HTML page, as shown here. Once complete, save your page as iframes.html, anywhere on your computer. Next, we'll need to add our iframes into the page. An iframe can be added with the iframe tag. We'll add this tag into the body of our HTML document. This is the open iframe tag. And I'll also insert the close iframe tag. The iframe tag has different attributes we can apply. The first attribute is the iframe source. And that's the source of the web page that will be displayed within this iframe. Next, we can specify the width of the iframe. We'll use 100% as the width. And we can also specify a height. And for that, we'll use 400. Now, not all web browsers support iframes. So the next thing we want to do is we just want to include a line of code that will be displayed if the user's browser does not support iframes. So in this case, the user will know to either use a different browser or update their existing browser. So that's our first iframe. And we're going to copy this block of code and paste it. And this time just switch the iframe source attribute to bing.com, which is the other search engine we want to display. Now go ahead and save your file and preview this in your web browser. And as you can see, both pages, ask.com and bing.com, are displayed in this single HTML document and contained within an iframe. Now that you have a better understanding of HTML, it's a great time to practice by building a complete HTML page. In this project, we'll do just that. We'll employ all the knowledge we've gained to create the HTML homepage shown in this example. Before we get started on this project, it's important to understand a few things. This page will be built strictly in HTML to give you additional practice with coding. Since we have not yet covered CSS, the style of development we use to build this page will not be the most efficient. For example, we'll be using inline style formatting, which is considered outdated. In the CSS portion of this course, we'll create much more effective page layouts that are responsive with mobile devices. Using only HTML, we're limited in certain respects when it comes to the format and layout of our page. Without CSS, we'll need to insert all our objects inside table rows and columns. As we've mentioned earlier, using tables as layout containers has become a thing of the past. Though do keep in mind that understanding how to work with tables is still important when working with tabular data. Aside from that, we'll be employing many useful skills that will carry forward, such as object insertion, text formatting, form development, and basic styling. The first section of this page we'll build is the header, which contains the navigation labels. To get started, create a new file and save the file on your computer. You can name the file whatever you like. Also create your basic HTML page structure as shown here. Since this entire header is nested inside of a table, that's the first thing we'll create. So start by creating a table. And I'll go over this in just a second. I've created a table here, and the width is 100%, so it'll expand and contract with the web browser. The height is 60 pixels, 0 border, cell spacing of 5, and cell padding of 5 as well. Give it a background color of black. And so that's the hex code for black. Inside this table, create a single table row. Inside this row, create a single table column. And give it a line attribute set to left. So anything contained in this column will be aligned to the left. Okay, so we have a table created with one row and one column. Inside this table, we're going to create a nested table. So this nested table will have a fixed width of 547 pixels, border of 0, a center alignment because we want all the links aligned in the middle, and a cell padding and spacing of 1. Now each link will need to be situated inside its own column. So we'll have to create 5 columns inside this table. Here's the first column. It has a width of 96 pixels. We've also created a font attribute and set the face to Verdana, Geneva, and sans serif. The color of the text will be white. And we've placed the link label inside an H3 element. So it gives it a slightly larger font size. Then we close the font tag and close the TD, the column tag. Now you'll need to do this for all the remaining link labels. So it's the same code. The only difference is that the width for each column is slightly different because some labels are longer than others. And of course, the label is also different for each item. Okay, and that's how that first section was created. So you can see it's fairly simple. With our header created, the next item we want to create is the callout bar. And that contains our website name and also a phone number where we can be reached. This entire section is contained within a table as well. And the text items are contained in a nested table with 2 columns. So let's go ahead and get started. Beneath our first table, I'm going to create another table. So just like the first table, I've given this table a width of 100%, so it expands and contracts with the web browser, a height of 150 pixels, border of 0, cell spacing and cell padding of 5, and the background color is a light gray color, and that's the hex code for the light gray color. Next, we'll need to create a table row. And inside this table row, we'll create a single table column. And we'll align the text inside this column. We'll give it a center alignment. Okay, so we have our table created. You can see the light gray background. And this table has 1 row and 1 column. Inside this column, we're going to nest the table that contains our text. So remember, the nested table will have 2 columns. So I've given this a table a width of 708 pixels, border of 0, cell spacing and cell padding of 1. Next, we'll create a table row. And inside this table row, we'll need to create 2 columns. One column will contain my business website, and the second will contain the call us today and then the phone number. So this is the syntax for the first column. So the column has a width of 338 pixels, text alignment of left. We've attached a font attribute. So There's really nothing new going on there. We've also added strong tags around the My Business text, so it gives it that bold look. And create a break, and then the website text, and then we've closed off the column. Now we'll create the second column, which contains the phone number. And it's almost the same thing. So it's a column, just the width is slightly different. It's a bit smaller. This time the text is aligned to the right. As you can see, its alignment is to the right here. Now we've attached a font attribute, made the Call Us Today text bold, and then the phone number. So there it is. With our callout bar created, the next thing we'll do is insert the table that contains our main image. We'll create this table under our callout table. Inside this table, create a table row. And inside the table row, create a table column. Give this column an alignment attribute set to center, because we want the image to be in the center of the column. And inside this column, create a nested table. Then create a table row. And insert the column that contains the image. Now this image can be found in your downloads folder. So you can use this image, or you can use another image of your choosing. So you can see we've given this column a center alignment attribute. We've inserted the image with a source attribute set to the image name. And remember to keep this image in the same folder that your HTML page is stored in, and then set the width and height of the image as well. Now press refresh, and you can see that the image is inserted. So with our image inserted, the next thing to do is create the table that contains this bit of text here. We'll create this table underneath our last table. Then create a table row. Now create a table column. I've set this, the column, the height to 72 pixels, horizontal alignment to center, and vertical alignment to top. That means the text will start at the top of the column. Now we'll create a nested table inside the column, and a table row. And then the column that will contain the actual text. Okay, so this column has a width of 726 pixels, alignment of center. We've attached a font attribute to style the text. And that's it. Just close the font tag and also close the column. And refresh the page. The next thing to do here is to create this Contact Us Today link, and also the form to register for the newsletter. So we'll go ahead and do that. So again, we'll start by creating a table to contain those sections. Next, create a table row. And inside this table row, create a table column. This column, give it a height of 72 pixels, alignment of center, and vertical alignment of top. And this is what's going to hold the Contact Us Today button. Inside this column, create a table. So this table contains the orange background color that you see here. So this here is the hex code for that color. And we've also set a width of 313 pixels. cell spacing and padding of 3. I'll create a table row. And now create the column that holds the Contact Us Today text. And we've given this column a width of 301 pixels, center alignment, a no wrap attribute, font color white, size 5, and font face. We've also attached a link. Now the link is just a number sign because we don't want it to actually go anywhere. And so make sure you do attach the link using the A element in the href attribute surrounding the Contact Us Today text. I'll refresh the page so we can see that the button is now there and the link is active. Now we'll need to create another table row inside this table. Now create a table column. Give this column a height of 72 pixels as well, alignment of center and vertical alignment of top. Inside this column, we're going to have our heading for the form element, register for our newsletter. And underneath the heading, we're going to have the actual form. So we've given the form the name contact, method post action send.php. This will not work until we actually create the send.php file. And again, we're going to be covering that in the PHP section of this course if you are taking this as part of the Web Development Masterclass. We've created an input, a text input, and we've named it email. And we've created a submit button as well. And that's it. So if we press refresh, we now have our text heading and the form element with the button. So the next thing we want to do here is create this table. And the table has 3 columns and 2 rows. In the first row, we have the headings. In the second row, we have some sample text and also an unordered list. So we'll go ahead and create that now. We'll create this table underneath our last. So start with the table tag. Create a table row. Now create a table column. Inside this table, create a nested table. Now create another table row. This row will contain our headings. And also just note that each heading is in its own column. So here we have each column. And each column, the first 2 columns have a width of 268 pixels. The third one has 290. We've attached a font attribute, and we've also made the text bold. And the remaining columns are almost identical. The only thing that's different is the actual heading. So we have About Us, Our Vision, and Services. Now we'll need to create the second row, which contains all this text. So we'll create the first column inside this row, and then the second. And now the third column, which contains the list, the unordered list. And so that's it. Once we have those columns inserted, we can refresh the page, and we can see that everything is as it should be. The only thing that remains now is the footer. The last part of this page we need to create is the footer. And the footer again contains the navigation labels and also a copyright line. So again, we'll need to create a table at the end of our last one. And this table has a background color of black. That's the hex code for black. Now insert a table row. And inside this table row, insert a column. Now just go ahead and insert the content inside this column. And so we've attached the font attribute. We've inserted the labels. So home, about, services, clients, and contact. And right underneath that, after our break, we've inserted the copyright line. And so that's it. I'll save this file and refresh. And we can see the footer is now there. And I'll expand the page. And you can see that the entire page has now come together.